Hello, everyone.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Data Science Office Hours. We're all really excited.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to
very late in the night. And
really excited. All right. Hello, everybody, and
we have a lot of food out. So if you could mute,
hello, everybody, and welcome
a lot of food out. And then mute All right.
I have muted Terry for now. So
okay. Thank you. So we have we muted. Now we can all hear. So yeah, we're really excited to be here again, Data Science Office Hours. We're having a topic, kind of a follow-up of our last topic, which was data visualization, and we're talking about data storytelling today. And you know, this is an incredibly important topic. It's a perfect follow-up to data visualization, and you know, we spent some time talking about different charts and graphs and other things that, you know, importance of visualization. But data storytelling is really where the rubber meets the road. And I think one of the most challenging things for a data scientist or a data person is to produce insights that actually produce change in an organization. So whether you're building a machine learning model, and that's going to be a part of automating a process, or you know, helping make decisions, report, you need to make sure that, you know, the insights that exist and the information that exists in your data, you know, are apparent, and that the right decisions can be made on them. You know, one of my favorite things to think about storytelling is if you learn about the human brain, you learn very quickly that our brains are not logical processors. They're actually story processors. And stories are something that are you know, ingrained in each one of us as humans. You know, we want to see things in the context of kind of a beginning, middle, and end. And this can be a huge benefit in the context of data science. If you frame your things your insights in a proper way. It can also be a danger, because as Eric talked last week, you know, executives, not just anyone, but executives are prone to see 2 points and call it a trend. You know, and so there's a danger on the flip side. But so today we're gonna talk about data storytelling, have a good discussion about it. If you have questions, please comment in the YouTube comments. But you know, I will conclude my opening now and see if anyone wants to kick us off with some thoughts.
Yeah, sure, I suppose. So going back to the part where humans, in, you know, how we're wired, I also agree with that. So I think the data part of the data storytelling speaks to the human's intellectual side, whereas the story really speaks to the emotional side. So storytelling with data, I think, can really have the most powerful impact. And what I mean by that is, you know, in addition to showing a chart and, you know, really making it as simple as possible, really having an explanatory title or a caption, you know, something short and down to the point that can really get to what point are you trying to get across to your audience.
Yeah, I think what Bo, just adding to from the neuroscience perspective, it's very crucial and very critical for data scientists or people who aspire to move into this field to understand that your presentation skills and sketching skills, as I think I saw Fabio also made actually a beautiful representation of how much we can translate on a piece of paper, and cognitively how beautifully our brain envisions what we actually want to tell. From a neuroscience perspective, you know, there is this phenomena called the neural coupling in your brain. When you are, for instance, as Bo mentioned, you make a certain correlation, and then you have dopamine firing back at the back of your brain. You know, even when you work out, for example, you have a whole lot of dopamine in your brain. You have oxytocin getting fired as well, where there's positive reaction of kindness, of love, or some kind of good feelings. There's a tremendous amount of cortex activity happening in your brain, and then people mirror, and then people want to reflect. So if you're telling something to a business manager, if you have, for example, salespeople in your meeting, I've had that problem as well as a tech guy. I've been sort of born and raised as a tech person, and when I started moving more towards business, I realized it really makes no sense giving them too much data and showing a whole lot of tabular data or other kinds of data, but trying to show correlations through graphs. And you've seen a bunch of stuff Kate has been publishing on Tableau and etc. So these skills, no matter how stupid they look, I know they seem so ridiculous because you want people to understand your technical skills, but as a data scientist, your business skills really, really go a long way. And the next part, obviously, is I think I will continue talking, and I'll just stop right now, is about telling it. The telling it is where the mirroring, the fourth and the most important part in your sort of neural activity happens. And so that is where people start realizing that, okay, so he's making sense or not, or making a right sort of connection or not. So I think storytelling is probably the most important thing, because if you're not able to present it in the most beautiful way, I think all that hard work of you guys running these tremendous exercises on whether deep learning or machine learning models actually is kind of waste, because you need to raise capital. You need to convince that boss. You need to take that model further than beyond your data science department.
All right. So I think this is one of my favorite topics on data science. And in the beginning, it was kind of hard for me to get started with this because, when you're starting physics and stuff, you're not an expert in storytelling things. When you're a scientist, they tell you how to tell like really specific things to really specific audiences, and you're not like, and no one's telling you, all of these people who's gonna hear you, they don't know what you're talking about. So my only experience when I was trying to understand this was seeing people who were doing like high level work, like Stephen Hawking and Neil deGrasse Tyson, Carl Sagan. They were telling stories about the universe, and it's a very different take if you read a Stephen Hawking book on maybe, I don't know, the universe, and on a divulgation book, and when you get the actual book, it's a really specific and hard topic that they communicate very differently for different audiences. So when I got started with data science, the hardest part for me was trying to communicate to business guys, because they were not in my radar before. The only people I knew before was like physicists and computer engineers and stuff. So it was really different because they didn't understand the things I was maybe trying to express. And I thought like, hey, but this is really easy for me to express, and I'm trying to say these things in not these weird terms, but even with these kind of high level words, my point was not getting to them. So I think last week, 2 weeks ago, when we talk about data visualization, we cover a really important part on how you can express your ideas through visualizations that are maybe not that fancy, or maybe they're not people are not gonna stand up and applaud you, but your point will get there, and they will understand what you're saying. One, I think very hard parts for me when I was starting was trying to speak to different kinds of people. We have marketing people from sales, finance, investment, and all of that, and they want to hear a different story, because to tell about your data and your results, the impact it will have on their areas is different. So I think one of the things I said before is that storytelling and visualization, you really need to know your audience and who you're talking about, who you're talking to. and it's not the same. It's not the same graphic you'll choose for a business guy, for a marketing guy, or for a salesperson. And so I think this is one of the things maybe they don't teach you that well in school. I don't know. I didn't have that in my school, and I did like I have an engineer, and I had my physics, and then a master's, and no one talked to me about how to really sell things with stories. And so this is one of the things you have to learn. You have to learn maybe with experience, and I think this is maybe here it will be the biggest gap we have in data science, because it's really easy to get some data and just use Python or R or Spark or whatever, and you do your GitHub and your Tableau. But if you're not explaining this to anyone, it's really hard to, when you get a job, an actual job, like a day-to-day job, to express your ideas. So I think we need to be able to have a way to express this. And one of the things I did when I was starting was creating blogs. Because when I create blogs, I create stories. And it was a good way for me to get started with this, creating blogs. And in the beginning, they were not that good. They're not even published. And then I got better and better and better. And I think now I can really tell a story, and it's fun for me to write it and people to read it. So, yeah.
Okay, yeah. For me, being the German, the method is super important. So that you have a story arc where you have the start with the problem or the question that you're trying to answer, and then moving from point A to point B, making some arguments, and then ending with a conclusion. So it's a nice story, and a not boring story. Some people can tell stories that are super boring, and they're talking like this and not all in one tone. And yeah, that you make clear arguments in every point, so the guy who is getting the presentation or who is looking at the data, that he can follow you and yeah, mostly know what you're talking about. So for me, this is the whole process is super important.
Thank you, everyone. Those are some really great comments. And Andreas, I want to kind of pick up on what you said. So storytelling is something that I have a lot of experience with. Every data science role that I've ever had, that's been a critical component where I've had to communicate my results and kind of sell my results. And you know, I learned a lot in my legal training about telling a story and other things like that. So I want to give a couple tips of things that I've learned and some things that might be helpful. I think, like Andreas pointed out, the reason storytelling is important is because it gives context to what you're telling. Andreas mentioned that there needs to be a beginning, a middle, and an end. Humans like having context of knowing, why is this important? Anything that you share needs to have a so what. You know, if your audience at the end of what you've talked about is like, okay, this was some good information, but what do I do with it? You know, that's the wrong feeling for someone to have after listening to you. They need to know, okay, this is what I should do, or this is the conclusion that I should draw. You know, that's really important. It also means you need to be careful that they're drawing the correct conclusion and not a wrong conclusion. And so I think the beginning, middle, and end piece is very important. I've found it helpful that if you approach giving a report or a presentation the same way as you would writing a paper, and what I mean by that is you start off telling people what you're going to tell them, and then you tell them what you're going to tell them, and then you end by telling them what you told them. You know, and that sounds kind of redundant, but that simple formula actually works really well. People like to have context of what is going on. So that's a good thing to think about. Do I have kind of a beginning, middle, and end? You know, introduction, you know, the meat of what I'm talking about, and a clear conclusion. That often helps is process, start broad and then get more specific. People want context of, saying this is, you could start off a report saying this is where our sales numbers were last year, and then we did this analysis, and as we got more specific, this is what the result is. Giving context and going from broad to specific, it is very useful. And then the last point that has been very helpful for me is using patterns when I teach or present something. People like things that are familiar to them. And if you notice, Hollywood movies all more or less follow the same storytelling pattern, and sometimes we say, oh, this is formulaic, but at the same time, other times we watch a movie and it's actually really formulaic and we love it because it is formulaic. You can leverage that same principle in your data storytelling. And one way that I do that is find out what type of charts resonate with your audience. You may have to teach them how to read a new chart. I've often had to do that, where the first slide will be, okay, I'm going to show you a bunch of charts that look like this. This is how you read them. This is how we tell what is good and what is bad. And once, they feel empowered that they're learning something, and then when you present the information, they're like, oh, that makes perfect sense. And so that's something that can be really helpful, is to, have a beginning, middle, and end, put things in context, and use repeated patterns. And I was going to add a fourth point, but I could kind of talk about how people like to have things in groups of 3. So I won't have a fourth point because that all of a sudden I wouldn't have groups of 3. So, all right.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. So staying with context for a second, I do have a story that I wanted to share about storytelling. So at Deloitte, we run this program called the Chief Information Officer Program. It's basically made for Chief Information Officers that are transitioning into a new role. So let's say Bank of America or, any company really in any industry. And we take them through a process where we collect data points about them. And then we have all these data points about the previous CIOs who have gone through the role. And one visual that we like to show them, it's called 4 Faces of the CIO. It's basically, how do they spend their time? Do they spend time in operations, in technology, innovation, or strategy? And we ask them how they currently spend their time and how they want to spend their time. And we have this cool spider chart that shows the before and the after and how do you plan to do it. So we show them their results. And going back to context, we also show them how other CIOs have answered the same question. And they look at it, broadly across all industries, and they have some insights, some thoughts on that. But then when we put it more into context, here's how the banking industry spends their time, it usually tends to make more sense. So when we tell them that story, we always have to start with, well, this is how everyone is doing it. And then we focus in on, say, these are how people are doing it in your space. So they can easily relate to it, because those are the people in their industry as well.
That's great. And so I think I have a question for Tari, and I think a lot of people will have this question too. I've been trying to work with deep learning this past year and maybe this year too. And one of the things that are getting harder and harder is how to explain what you found or models. When someone tells me, hey, how can I explain a model to a business person? I always send them Andreas' article on how to explain things to others on machine learning. And the funny part, and I always read that article. This is an amazing article from Andreas, and he's great because he's saying, yeah, don't use the word model, don't use the word machine learning, because it's not okay, and they won't understand what's a model. And when you start talking about models, so they're gonna feel weird in their stomach. So I think one thing for Tari, never all these kind of different kind of really hard models like capsule networks and GANs and convolutional nets. How are you? If I build a system that has all these different kind of new architectures and stuff, and I need to build a presentation to explain this to someone. How will I do that? How do I say I use deep learning? I don't use the word deep learning. I say this is a traditional approach I use. What would you do there?
Great question. I have unmuted. Can you guys hear me? You guys, okay, awesome. So, yeah, I think, I didn't talk about my month-and-a-half travel, and I have 2 weeks and I have to travel again, which is great. And this is what I learn every day, is to how to explain things, even to people like ourselves, each other in a simpler way. So I'm working with a few medical institutions in Europe and also in Asia. And so skin cancer or lung cancer kind of, image analysis is really an interesting area where we're doing a bunch of research. And so I think the best way how I explain is not to everybody about capsule networks, unless there is someone who has read some literature around it. As you already know, there's no literature right now available on capsules that explains things in a very simple way. So for me, a lot of hard work has gone into explaining things from neuroscience perspective. I realized that was also a little bit too hard because it got even more deeper. And I found that people 1 to 10% got interested. Everybody else kind of was signed out. They zoned out. I think the best way is to show it from the endpoint. So you have the beginning, which is you have a whole lot of huge, let's say, image files which you use, 3D scans. And if you show that, talk about that, just say that there's very complex images, huge 3-dimensional images. And then on the other end, you have an app which is doing that analysis for you in that frozen, that reduced, let's say AI. Sometimes I just say AI, depending on who I'm talking to. Sometimes I have executives, people who are, medical practitioners, but don't care about those, models which you have trained, which you have used, other kind of things like transfer learning. So I just tell them that on your camera, there's already enough information inside that camera of your phone to basically be able to make that, classification for that skin cancer, that mole that you have. So I do have an app here, and I carry that app as well. I'm meeting the founders of a company that has raised about $15 million approximately. It's a Dutch company. They have the best app in the world right now on skin cancer detection. So tying the knots together by showing how much work and how much effort it takes, and kind of explaining it in a very simple way. You have images, you do all kinds of different things, which is what we call deep learning. And then eventually you do more complex tasks, where you need advanced skills in this new world of let's say machine learning or artificial intelligence. And eventually the output is that you have an app in which any medical surgeon, whether it is in telemedicine or anyone, working anywhere in a different part of the world, can carry. Actually, you have a doctor, you literally have a dermatologist on your phone. So all your, medical practitioners right now, if anyone is listening even today, right now, you have like a mini dermatologist on the phone here, on that camera. And basically, you're looking together with all that wisdom that you have. You have gathered 30, 40 years of wisdom of understanding how to look at moles. Old people have also moles on their skin, and how to classify them as, being a healthy mole as compared to a mole that is looking old and not well and unhealthy on a young skin. And I think that is a process which becomes super interesting. And then people ask, so, well, how can you improve the models? And then you start explaining that there are new techniques and new technologies that are being developed right now that look at images from different perspectives and various dimensions. You're looking at texture, looking at other things that we have had other models that were not so popular. And when people go deeper, then I explain, okay, that is what this convolution is. And convolution is also a beautiful story, and I really explain it depending on how deep people want to go. in looking at how Dr. Hubel and Dr. Wiesel did that research. But I've taught myself, giving all these sort of lectures and also talking to business leaders, is to really keep it very simple, but still show sophisticated work that is being done by data scientists at the back, and then eventually show the value of how data scientists or deep learning engineer, computer vision specialists, or whoever has contributed to this work. So I think when you say that, and that's what I do when I train people in corporate environment, one, what I see is the engineers who have those skills or who may have worked on those partially feel very appreciated of their work that they have done. Two, the business owners who I talk to and I explain to them why they need to allocate, I don't know, a couple hundred million euros or even $10 million worth of fund to make this run, because IT is fine, but the special unit of those PhDs and those scholars that work with you, and as Kate mentioned, these are the CIOs who need to be convinced, and sometimes the CDO or even sometimes CEOs are also taking charge of these roles. They start getting the picture, and you have to visualize these things as well. And then an online demonstration, which is what I do with the skin cancer app, really, really blows everything away. This is like seeing from birth, from Genesis to a full-scale application that can be a business. So I think I mix those stories together, and as more questions come, then you can say, okay, I'll take that question later. Let's have a one-on-one kind of a discussion later, and make sure that you also follow through. That you make sure that you say, hey, listen, I agreed with you. Normally what people do in presentations, they say, I'll take that question later, they never do. I've seen that all the time. Make sure you always do. People say, wow, he followed through. So I think simplify your message. Explain, no matter how complex the technology, you understand beautifully in simpler words, and continue to work on it. I work on it every day. Even so, I always look back and say, I think I could have done a better job there. So I think, yeah, it's very important to break down the complex pieces in a very simple sort of narrative, and make sure well, like I said, you know what's going to stick. You see the body behavior, you see how people are kind of swaying, or you see someone is nodding, and make sure that you just pay attention to kind of adapting your story and explaining that, hey, I think you seem to have a question. What do you think? Do you listen? Do you agree with my story or not? So bottom line is, I think deep learning is really not that complex. We are super excited about it as people, scientists or researchers in this field. But I think the key is to really make these things happen in reality, and get more and more people with more jobs. So I would say keep the message simple, no matter how complex and how beautiful work you're doing right now. I don't know if anybody has anything else to add.
Yeah, I think that was a really interesting participation, and I think that the final words are really important. Like, I think it doesn't matter how hard you think your model is, or how complex, or how many different techniques or papers you use to build something. You really need to make this simple for others to hear, and it's the only way you're gonna get out there. And maybe it's because I don't know about you guys, but you need to sell your solutions to the business. And this is, even though you're working for a company, they're your client, and you need to sell them your solutions. I think one of the biggest frustration for a data scientist is working 4 months on a thing that's never gonna see the light, and that's just very annoying, because you made it. I mean, a really good work, and everything is on point. But if you wasted those 30 minutes you have in the end to explain all of these months of work into a compelling story that will add value, that the business will think this will add value and make me more money, or make the processes more I don't know, optimize something, I think in the end you're just losing your time. So I think like being able to translate these different kinds of hard things we do into simple words is an amazing task we need to understand to do. And maybe I have a question now for Andreas. And I know he works a lot with big data and all of these different kind of tools and like Spark and stuff. And maybe you're working more in the infrastructure part of data science, like data engineering stuff. So what about storytelling for different kind of data profiles? I don't know if you're being in a conference with data engineers and machine learning engineers, and now there's even AI engineers, data analysts, and all of these different kind of people that maybe they will understand what you're gonna say, but they're gonna sit in a different perspective. I mean, from you in your side as a big data engineer, what was the hardest part when you got to talk to data scientists about these kind of different things they want you to implement or help you with? What was the hardest part in the beginning for you?
Yeah, usually the data scientist itself, he's not very interested, or he has not that deep feeling for what is big data, what actually happens with my data in the background, how does it get to me, and where are the limitations of how I can process the data and so on. And sometimes sometimes my problem is that the data scientists, let's say there are a lot of cool tools right now everywhere, and you cannot do everything, and so you need to go in and bring them down to earth and say, okay, that's cool for a, let's say, development environment, but for actually then running the system and a live deployment, there you have some problems, and we cannot do this because I'm not going to put this up on as a use case for everyone, and make a lot of hours of invest only to do this little thing, and yeah, the whole topic is sometimes hard to get through the data scientists. I don't know if that explains it. Probably maybe a short feedback.
Yeah, I think that I mean, I think we all have different experiences because this is a really big world. So I think Bo has something to say.
Okay.
Well, not about that specifically, but I think sorry. Well, definitely about data storytelling.
Okay.
But I think, I think there's some really good points, both raised by all of you. And as Terry was speaking, I was thinking about, TED Talks. And I think that, for that is a great place to learn about presentation and data storytelling skills. Some of the best TED Talks are actually very data heavy, but they're also very simple in their presentation and very clear in their message. And the thing that I love about TED Talks is they're long enough that you can get into some good detail, but they're short enough that they don't lose your attention. I think people don't have a very long attention span. It's even worse now that we have mobile devices. And so you need to get to the so what quickly. You need to help them develop some sort of emotional attachment to, well, why should they care about it? Terry's example about showing, here's the app that's actually predicting skin cancer. That's a really great way to say, this is why you should listen to what I'm talking about. You can actually show this is why you should care. So I think, looking at TED Talks, especially ones that use a lot of data, and graphs, and there's some great things that you can learn from that. Usually their slides are very minimal. They only have, never text heavy on the slides, and the slides are meant to augment the story that they're telling. And I've learned a lot from looking at TED Talks. So I think Andreas has more to follow up on that.
So yeah, one thing I find very important is to have, in the corporate world, you have a corporate design where every slide not looks the same but has the same style, the same design, and so your charts are looking familiar over the whole presentation, over the whole visualization. And this is super important because I have seen presentations where this is not the case, and then, for instance, you have on one slide you have let's say you have a graph that has some companies in it, and then you use some colors, and on the next slide you have the same companies in it, you have totally different colors, everything looks different, and so the viewer or the guy you're holding the presentation to, he cannot follow you. Although the information is very good, it's hard to follow because everything looks different. And yeah, for me this is also very important. So, and this is also in the TED Talks, like Bo said, they have always a clear corporate design, and it's very, very nice to follow, very, very easy to follow.
Kate, the camera is on you somehow. I don't know.
Yeah, somehow.
No, I was going to say something, but I thought Fabio was going to say something. I just wanted to add. So for the TED Talks, I actually listened to one a few days ago, and the one thing they ended with, it was actually about presentations, and they said nobody ever leaves a presentation or stops a story or says, "I wish this was longer." So simple is definitely key, but also if you're on the trying to decide to make it longer or shorter, definitely try to make it shorter. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah.
Right. So I think I have something to say about what Andres was talking about. And I think consistency is a very important step in your storytelling. And if you're gonna maybe present some graphs, I think as Bob saying in the beginning, you really need to explain to the audience how they're gonna read these kind of charts. And I mean, in BBVA right now, some data scientist from Spain, she created a palette for graphs on R. And I think that was a really good thing to do, because you have this R package that will transform all of your different kinds of graphs into the colors of the bank, or the colors that go according to the things that were defined for, I don't know, by the bank as how it should look. So, and also, not only about the styling of your graphs, is the styling should also have some of the important steps on your graph, like really big ticks. I mean, I cannot count the numbers of moments when I was in a presentation and the person who was speaking were trying to understand their own graph, and this is not okay. And this is not okay because they're like, I don't know what's the x-axis because I cannot read it. This is a killer for me. If you're in a presentation and you have, and this is not that uncommon, and you have, yeah, and I don't really understand what this line here, but someone just drew it there and it is there. So I think you really need to understand why you're building these graphs. And one of the things Sarah mentioned in our group before was when she was teaching her course, a lot of people were just building graphs because this is storytelling time, so let's build graphs. So all of these plots or different kind of things you're building, they need to have a meaning and a consistent, and they need to tell a story too. I mean, if you just put out there 4 different kind of graphs because you learned how to do them yesterday, and you really want to show people that you're the best in Tableau or in R or Python, this is nothing for the business. You need to have a consistent way of explaining your ideas. First, like as Bo said, explaining how to read these graphs. They need to have a consistent form, and they need to tell a story. So these graphs should be connected. They need to be. I mean, maybe you can create a dashboard. Maybe that's a dashboard is a easier way to connect different kinds of graphs. And I think this is an easier way to get to the audience. And oh yeah, I had a question for Kate. So my question here was, so as a Tableau expert that you are, when you are doing your data science process and stuff, do you get maybe like, I mean, the will to create graphs that maybe you think they're really obvious for you, and when you explain to them, and when you explain them to the business, they don't understand them, or maybe they think a different kind of thing about the graph? It's like my point here is, how hard was it for you to transform your abilities with Tableau into really effective graphs for the business?
Yeah, good question, Fabio. So for me, it was pretty easy, actually. I didn't have to overcome much challenges because the 2 groups that I've joined where I had to use my Tableau skills, they were in Excel, okay? They were either in Salesforce or several Excel spreadsheets that were, maybe 8 different data sources. So what happened was, when I built a just very, very simple, let's say, bar chart across 2 or 3 data sources, they were already amazed and blown away and like, oh my God, what is this gorgeous chart and how did you do it? But over time, once that kind of novelty of dashboarding wore off, then they're like, oh, now can we see this and can we see that and can we show this a different way? So then after the first wow factor, definitely there was a lot of back and forth, and we kept trying to adjust and see what we felt the audience would like. And speaking of audience, it's actually pretty difficult when you have multiple levels of people using, or different types of audience using the same dashboard, especially in Tableau. So for example, we have, probably 70 to 80% of the audience that loves to go in and have it be interactive with drop downs, click here, filter there. And we have like the 20% that say, I want a PowerPoint deck of this. I don't want things to move. I want a spreadsheet, I don't like things moving. So definitely been something I had to deal with, where I'm trying to plan for 2 different types of audience and have it be able to print to PDF and all of that. So actually, I wanted to add something to, I think, what you and Andreas were talking about in terms of consistency. And in addition to just having, and if we go back to deck making, slides for a minute, in addition to being consistent across each slide, it definitely does need to have a story. So it definitely needs some kind of flow. An example is if you're showing a bar chart that shows expenses, and it shows, like 5 categories, and category A has like by far the most expenses. The next slide or story point should explain the why, because that's what people are going to ask in their head, like, why does category A have so many expenses? So just try to anticipate the audience's questions and answer it with your next data point.
All right, thank you, Kate. I think we're getting close to the end. I think we can start answering some questions about data storytelling. I think we've covered some good topics about consistency, about having a beginning, middle, and end, and having a point. There was one question towards the beginning of the chat about how do you plot data with 1 million data points, and this I've run into this problem when, especially working with like genomic data sets, other things like that. And something that you often need to realize, if you're going to plot a million data points, obviously, depending on what tool you use, that could be really prohibitive. So I have a student who's, in the class I teach, they were trying to plot some points on a map using Leaflet, which is an open source JavaScript mapping library. And they were bringing over way too many points, and he said on his computer it took 2 hours to load all the points on his map. And so there's some optimization things that we need to work on there. But the first question I would have is, if you take a subset of those million points, does it convey the same information visually as all a million points? And otherwise, or in other words, is there a valid reason that you need to plot all 1 million points? It's important that plots and charts are often used to show patterns and trends. They don't necessarily need to show every single point. And so I think, I would be hard pressed to find a good reason to actually need to plot 1 million points on a chart. Yeah, I think Fabio had something to add to that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And if it's not completely necessary and 99% it won't be, don't plot 1 million points. I mean, you won't find anything new on plotting 1 million or one I don't know, 10,000. So, but if you really need to do this, and I shared 2 libraries last week in Python where you can do that. One of them is called Data Shader, and Data Shader, you can plot billion points, and it's really interesting for mapping data. And there's an example with the NYC data from taxes, and you can plot every single ride from like 6 years, and there are billion points out there. And it's very easy to install. It is free. So, and the other one is called Vaex, V-A-E-X, and it's kind of the same as Data Shader, and it has some differences because you can just group data by some stuff. If you're using R, there's a way too. There's a library called dbplot, and dbplot works with sparklyr. That is the Spark API interface to Spark created by RStudio. And I actually met the guy who created dbplot, Edgar, and he showed me how, I mean, the thing here is, it will compute like an histogram of 10 billion points in a distributed way, and then it will use ggplot to group and then just plot it. But it's a really intelligent solution, because if you have a scatter plot, if you have 1 million points in a scatter plot, it's nonsense. And what this library can do for you is it will show like a scatter plot, but with like size or hits. So if it's darker, there's more data there. If it's lighter, it's less data there. So there are really interesting ways of plotting a lot of data, and this will be more common in the near future. So do check out the solutions we have there in Python and in R.
Yeah, but overall, Fabio, I think people need to, I think I said this last time, need to keep in mind a screen only has a limited resolution, and it makes, if you're thinking about I'm plotting 5 million data points and you want to present it, it absolutely makes no sense to use a simple chart. You need to pre-process the data more and make a smarter, like you said, use a smarter library for that. It makes no sense, because when you want to print all this out, screen resolution is smaller anyways, so makes no sense.
All right. Do we have a different question here? There was a link there, but it's not anymore. So someone was talking about the Andres article. It's a really good article. Read it. I'll be translating that into Spanish tomorrow. So if someone doesn't know English, I think Andreas needs to translate it into German. Yeah.
Lay.
All right. I think we don't have more questions here, but I will share in the I just share in the chat a blog about how to plot a million points and when it's necessary and when it's not necessary. All right, so I think we can wrap this up, and I think this was a very interesting topic, and I learned a lot. So thank you all for that, and I think maybe we will.
Terry, did you have something to say?
Yeah, Terry.
Speaking about reading body language, yeah. So I think this is great, Fabio. You're absolutely right. I think if you're not able to distill all that years and years and weeks or even months of hard work, which we do as data scientists or researchers or whichever position we're in a difficult spot. I just wanted to say something very different. I had announced day before yesterday that we were working with University of Texas in Dallas, and I was just reading the mail. The guys have been working all night, and it's kind of gone through. So just had a great news to give to my friends in Dallas and Texas that I'll be there for a couple of days. So it's been announced, and I the tickets were booked. So that's all I wanted to say, actually. So I guess I will use this wisdom which I heard and listened from you guys and try to put this in a more interesting way to this. A couple of hundred people are already lined up already in University of Texas, even lots of alumni. So for me, I mean, it is very important that the things that you mentioned, those tools, I want to look it up. I want to look at those blogs. So for me, it's been very useful. I guess that's all I wanted to say. And I want to use it in next month in Dallas. The couple of days I'll be there to teach machine and deep learning and how to combine it and make exciting. So thank you so much, all of you guys. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
This last minute, we had like one interesting question, I think. And is what if different charts tells different stories of the same problem? Someone wants to say something about this?
I have a quick comment about that. If you have, I mean, this comes down to, so I was just teaching about k-nearest neighbors algorithm this last week, and it's actually a similar problem, finding an optimal k. Where different k might tell a different story. But when I run into this case of where I maybe have two charts and they're the same data, but they're telling different story, typically what I do is I add another type of chart in there, and you need to understand what is really the truth and understand, if you have a box and whisker plot, and that's telling one story, look at the underlying distribution of the data and maybe look at a scatter plot or something else, and you can see, okay, why are they telling different story? Because there is typically there is one way that it should be interpreted, and so one thing that's been helpful to me, and it's not the only thing you can do, is to look at some different types of plots and see if there's consistency when you add a different way of looking at the data.
Yeah, just wanted to add something to that. It's not about scatter plots, but line charts. And I'm not sure if this was covered in the last data science office hours with data visualization, but basically when you change an axis of a line chart, you can essentially use the same data but show a very different story. So if you have a trend that looks like it's slowly kind of going up and down, and then you remove the zero from the axis and it looks like it's extremely volatile. So I think in a case like that, you just have to really notify the audience what they're looking at. And it goes back to what we spoke about in the beginning of educating them on how to understand the chart and what is the data saying.
Last question, a book to follow, I think, on data storytelling. Do you have something to show people?
Storytelling with data, yeah.
I have that book. It's a great one, Kate. I'll second that. So.
Yeah.
If you guys can write the name in the chat for people to look for it.
Sure.
I think just the last thing which I would like to add is use your, see, the thing is, you are a data scientist, you are that person, you have a personality, you have, you know, people want to listen to you. So I'm definitely in favor of reading the wisdom of people who have done this for years. For example, Cole has worked like, what, 10, 12 years working with analytics departments from at Google. So she did a great job writing that book. But I would say try to bring your personality, because you are that person who's making that impact. And no matter, because I've tried to pretend to be other people. I can tell you honestly, you know, you look at TED and you look at other people, you start, you know, speaking in a different, nice, slow way. And people say, this is not who you are, Terry. Because, you know, I came to this conference because I know you're like this, you know, funny guy who has this crazy things to tell. He jumps off the stage and starts walking around. And I realized that it's best to be yourself. So combine the wisdom of other people, but be yourself is really important, because sometimes people want to say, hey, that little guy walking around with great ideas, bring him up on stage. We want him to tell that story. So sort of don't, you know, try to be yourself, you know, showing yourself in a beautiful way is what people want to see. People want to listen to you as well, not just people want to see a representation of someone else inside you. People want to see, you know, want to listen to Kate or Bo or Andreas or Fabio or Sarah. That's what they want to listen to. So I would say that would probably be something, you know, for me, that has been a great learning experience. People said when I started pretending to be someone else, they could see it very quickly. Because I was not smiling, my body language was gone, I was in a scripted mode. And when you relax, then you just sort of, you know, you're flowing, you know, talking about Mihali's, you know, book. He's done such a beautiful research on, you know, the flow and how it works. And I think, you know, be that person, you know, the Zen. So I guess that's something which has also been important for me.
Great. So thank you all for being here. And we will meet again in 2 weeks. We're changing now the format to we will have this kind of talks every 2 weeks. So if you really want us to cover a topic, just write about it on LinkedIn. We're all there all the time. So we really, yeah. Oh, and okay, so thank you all for being here, and thank you guys for sharing the time with us. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.